Hey guys, are you like me? Do you love Monster Hunter? Were you also disappointed that the newest game didn't have your favorite monster in it? Well, to ease my disappointment, I'm going to sculpt my favorite monster. But I already did that a few years back when I made this Diablos. So instead, I'm gonna make my brother's favorite monster. As I do before every project, it's time for some rough sketching to familiarize myself with the subject matter and try my best to plan out the overall shape and composition of the piece. Now for this one, I want to have the Diablos in mid-run, right as it's noticed something, presumably you, the hunter, and is starting to change course to come mess up your day. Yeah, the head angled to one side, tail swinging to counterbalance the shift in momentum, back leg kicking up some dirt, all with a very happy expression on its lovely face. With any sculpture, you always want to start with a good armature, usually using aluminum wire, but aluminum is way too flimsy for this beast. For this monster, I'm going to use some galvanized steel wire. This stuff is significantly stronger, but that also makes it a bit of a pain to work with. With a simple skeleton bent into shape and held into place with some thin aluminum wire, I'm faced with a new problem. This baby can't stand on its own. One trip to the hardware store later, I've made myself this fancy little wooden block clamp, topped with aluminum tape to help prevent clay from sticking to it when in the oven. Oh yeah, that's not going anywhere. To prevent this from weighing 20 pounds in the end, we're going to bulk out the core with aluminum foil. Now I've seen some people use painter's tape to hold the foil in place, but I much prefer wrapping it with thin wire. More surface area for the clay to grip onto, or something like that. Even with the foil held down, I still don't like working directly off a foil surface, but a thin layer of Super Sculpey Ultralight fixes that problem, and also barely adds any weight, which is much needed in a larger piece like this. And once the form is all covered and smoothed out a bit, it's off to the oven to lock it all in. And instantly, after it's all hardened, I realize the right leg is way too far back for what I want to be a mid-run pose. So cutting the clay around the joints, I can not so easily get the leg to move further forward, giving it sharper angles going down to the foot. Before adding on new clay, I always coat the surface with some liquid clay. Now, I won't show this step each time, but know it happens. Now, for most of this sculpture, I'll be using Super Sculpey Firm. For the level of detail I like to add, this clay will hold its shape much better while working than the softer versions. Now, I don't know why, but I always like to work kind of like a printer, starting on one end and only moving on after completely finishing that section, details and all. While this can cause problems down the line if you don't plan correctly, I find being able to lock progress in with periodic trips to the oven makes the process infinitely easier. That way you don't have to worry about messing up areas you've already finished when the clay is all still soft. The plan is to start on the tail and work my way up to the torso, then the legs, then I'll figure out the rest of the plan later. Now, to get the tail looking like that iconic Diablo style, almost double-sided axe shape, we have to build it up a bit. Blending and shaping the form until it matches my reference image. Using my hobby knife, I can carve down the form and then smooth it back out. With one of my ball stylus tools, I'm adding divots where spikes will go later, and then I start roughing in the finer details. For the spikes on this guy, I'll either carve them in like this, or I'll make them separately and pre-bake them, depending on where they need to go. But really, I don't really have much rhyme or reason behind when I use one way or the other. After pressing in the pre-baked spikes, it's time to start adding those finer details. Now, working on a monster like the Diablos, most of the detailing comes down to adding and layering textures. Something that can help immensely with this is using a texture tool, and making them is super easy too. But using the tool, I'm just lightly rolling it over areas where the clay looks too smooth, and finally I go in with my dental tools and add all the details I'm sure no one will ever really notice, except for me. With the sides done, we can now make the tip of the tail. For this, I roll out a thin strip of clay and cut it into an even thinner line, and then wrap this around as a little clay cone, blending each layer as I go down. And placing this on like a little party hat, we can start blending it in, adding a few more layers as we do. Now begins the most repetitive process of the sculpture, adding all the large scale plates that line the entire back of the Diablos, from the tip of the tail all the way up to the head. Separating the armored surface and the underbelly, the Diablos has this line of spikes that run most of its body. So many spikes. Now, after getting them all secured to the tail, I then use my metal shaper tool to give them some harder edges, and to smooth them out a bit without losing those edges, I gently run the back of my nail across them. This also adds some subtle texture, which is a nice bonus. Now, continuing with the underside, I'm adding a few thin lines of clay to try and mimic how the skin would be folding and stretching as he runs and the tail turns. Now, with the underside complete, we can get back to my favorite part, the scale plates. Now, realizing they're missing a little something, I go back and add these tiny little bumps, a step that definitely didn't add over an hour to the process. And of course, we have to add some scratches here and there. Now, remember me saying that I like to bake in my progress as I go? Well, I like to do that for the tail, but don't want to commit locking in all this clay I added to the torso just yet. So, off it comes. Now, before I chuck it into the oven, I'm brushing the whole thing down with some isopropyl alcohol, or IPA for short, to smooth the harsher edges and really blend things together a bit. Now, with the tail locked in, I can start adding back the clay I just removed from the underbelly and begin adding some details. Using this bit of plastic I rescued from the trash can and my metal pointy tool, I can add in lots of organic looking skin creases, folds, and wrinkles. And going to town with my little texture tool. With the underbelly done and baked in, I decide to shift over and start working on the right leg. Now, remember how I wasn't happy with the shape of the leg earlier on and had to fix it? Well, I didn't fix it enough. So now I have the joy of performing some reconstructive knee surgery. With the operation all patched up and parts of the leg further bulked out, I think it's looking much better. After adding in some simple textures, we can start working on the more complex details. For the scales on the shin, I mark out the layers and then go in with my needle tool to cut in the individual scales. This ended up looking really rough and messy, so I aggressively brushed it down with some IPA. And moving up the leg, I add the larger armor scale plating to the thigh, detail it a bit, and then cut out some cool battle damage to the back of the leg. Excited to keep moving, I bake everything in and instantly regret it. Those scales look awful. I hate them, and they need to go. Luckily, I was able to humanely break them off, so I can try again. This time I decided to add on a large sheet of clay and then carve out the scales from it, and keeping a more uniform direction in mind as I do. I also made a new texture tool for adding larger, more defined scales. With attempt 2 complete and looking much better, it's back to the oven once again. Now, if you're familiar with leg anatomy, you may know that they usually have a foot attached at the bottom. So let's get that added on. Now for this, I decided to start with a chunk of clay and then cut out a few toes. Smoothing and shaping them a little before adding it onto the leg. And refining the shape a bit with my hobby knife. For the scales that run down the top of the foot, I rolled out a thin sheet of clay, and as you can very clearly see, I'm cutting out the line of scales with my knife. And with the steady hands and precision of a surgeon, I press them onto the foot and blend them in. And then repeating this process thrice over for the toes. Now it's just a matter of cutting out the claws, giving him a more defined heel, and adding the little dew claw. Looking pretty good. On my way to the oven, I tripped and accidentally sculpted the entire left leg as well, a process that was absolutely just as riddled with structural corrections that needed to be made. Now with the legs done, we can get back to the back. But before that, it's time to finally figure out the wings. Using an expertly drawn, anatomically accurate rendition, I can line up and form the wire armature of the wings. This time I'm using aluminum wire since I want to be able to bend these out of the way as I continue to work on the rest of the body before actually making the wings. For the thinner inner wing bits, I'm taking my thin wire, doubling it up, feeding one end into my drill, and spinning it into a much stronger wire. By marking where the wings will sit, I cut out a trench through the torso and wrap the wire around the body. With the wing armature in place, I'll fill the gaps and lock it all in. Now back to the back, for real this time, I can start adding on the largest, most defined of those back scale plates. So unlike the flatter ones, these plates have spikes coming out on the edge. Of course, more spikes. So pre-baking a whole bunch of them, I can easily push them in and start really moving around the clay to give a more uneven, organic look and texture. Doing the same thing again for the largest of the plates, except adding most of the details before attaching it, since the underside would be very hard to get to once it's actually on the back. And then dumping it into the oven once again. Next up is the neck and the head. But that means the placeholder head I've come to love needs to go. Anyways, for the largest part of the head, and most iconic part of the Diablos in my opinion, the horns, I once again need to build a little armature and bulk it out as much as possible to keep the weight as low as I can get it. If the head is too heavy, it could cause some serious structural issues down the road. With the ultra-light core of the horns hardened, I can add on the firmer clay and start carving in that awesome spiral look. Now to start the hardest part of any piece, the face. Starting off with a big ball of clay, which I will kind of cut away at and form as I go. Making and baking the two tusks, these can get pressed into the jowls and blended in. After hours of work, I decided I hated it. So, back to square one, I guess. This time, waiting to attach it until after most of the form and details have been added, which I found worked much better. With take 2 done, I can press it into place and begin working on the lower jaw. This is also where I'll attach the tongue. While I'm not pre-baking this, I do want to give it a little wire support since it's pretty thin. And using a toothbrush, I give it a pretty convincing tongue texture that absolutely no one will ever see or notice. Before attaching it to the lower jaw, I also add in the bit of tissue that connects the tongue to the floor of the mouth. Now just need to attach the jaw, blend it in place, and finish up the last of those mouth details. Oven time once again, and now we have a proper intimidating looking Diablos. But before the head is done, we do need to add the crest. And since this is another thin piece of clay, I'm adding in several support wires to the back of the head, which we can press the crest down into. Clay in place, we can blend it into the horns and start adding in all those nice cresty details. Now for this, I made a third texture tool with one side that will add a hard line of defined scales and the other side for adding clusters of defined scales. With the head done and baked, it's time to figure out how the heck I'm going to attach it to the neck. But after some trial and error, I get it attached and can finally use this long bundle of wire I left to wrap it around the neck, further stabilizing that head. Now to fill in the gaps with more clay. But while I'm doing this, I'm not super happy with how wobbly the head is. So I add another wire out the back with this wide loop at the end, which I'm hoping will help secure it better in place and prevent some of that wobbling. And it seems to do a fairly good job at this. Adding on the last of those back scale plates, finally those are done, and detailing the underside of the neck, the only thing left is to sculpt those wings. After bulking it out with some foil and wrapping the exposed wire with thinner wire to help the clay stick, I can start slapping on the clay. A process you've seen plenty at this point, so I'll move a little faster this time. Now slowing things back down, we can start building up all those details. And since this is largely the same process I've gone through already with the rest of the body, I'm just going to take a moment and talk about the charity contest that I'm entering this piece into. So this is the second annual Crafting for Hope charity art event, which I participated in last year. This event aims to raise awareness and donations in support of childhood cancer research and treatment. So while it's too late to participate in the event this year, if you wish to contribute to the donations, I've put a link to the Crafting for Hope website and the donation page in the video description. And if you're interested in seeing what I made last year, I'll also include a link to that playlist. Now with most of the arm detailing done, it's time to break out the cosplay. Now, I'll be using this for the wing membrane since cosplay retains some flexibility after baking. This should help prevent the thin membrane of the wings from easily breaking once it's all baked. After getting the first section attached, I realize there is no way the rest of the wing will go on without some added support. So I attach a bit of wire for it to rest on top of. After blending it all into place, I tatter up the edges of the wing and start adding in some wrinkly details. Going back and adding the last details to the, I guess it would technically be a finger, right? I don't know. And finally adding some little veins to the wing membrane because why not? And with that, the first wing is complete. Now I just need to do that whole process again on the second wing. Or do I?
Tasty!
With the body finally done, it's time to build it a base. So after figuring out the placement of the body, I drill some holes where the wires will feed down into. As we saw in the intro, the Diablos is a desert creature, so we'll be making a nice sandy surface for him to be running along. Marking out the waves in the sand, I thoroughly cover the surface in liquid clay. Laying some thick lines of ultralight along my lines, then blending them together and forming some little waves. Now, before baking it, I do a test fit of the Diablos to leave perfect imprints for his feet to sit in when it's time to finally put it all together. Now, off camera, I also made several little round cacti, which will bring a pop of color to the piece after everything's done and painted. Now, with the clay baked, I give it a thick coat of this Mod Podge paint mixture, and then sprinkle on some fine sand and dirt that I had nearby, then leave it to dry. Looks good, but there are a few bald spots that I'll fix off camera. To really lock the sand in place though, I mixed everything with some IPA and tediously dropper on some of that Mod Podge mix, which I've thinned way down with water, and set it off to dry once again. In the meantime, let's get to painting the Diablos. Now, I'm not gonna lie, watching the footage for this was super boring, and I'm not gonna subject you to it. In summary, I simply added layer after layer of varying earthy colors, lots of dry brushing, and a dark wash to tie it all together. That's it. And I can't forget those off-camera cacti. Now for the base, I broke out my airbrush and hit it with a sandy purple from one side and then a brighter tan from the other. This gave a really satisfying but subtle shadow effect. And last but not least, the edge of the base gets painted black and everything is locked into place. What a beast of a sculpture. It ended up weighing 5 pounds with a wingspan of 20 inches. A good thing I don't need to worry about where to put it, since it was my Christmas present to my brother. Now it's his problem to deal with. A super fun project to make though, but maybe next I'll do something a little smaller in scope and size. And once again, make sure to check out Crafting for Hope, links down below, and consider donating to the cause if you're able. And for the 10 people that make it all the way to the end of the video, thanks for watching. See y'all next time, whenever that will be.